Excellency, State Minister of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Federal Republic of Ethiopia, Professor Afewokasu, Your Excellency, Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa and Under Secretary General, Dr. Vera Songwe, Your Excellency, Chief of Staff of the Africa Union Commission, Ratebayo Todeta, Your Excellency, Ambassador of the Republic of Ghana, Her Excellency Ama Adoma Tum Amoa, Representative of the Swedish Embassy, Miss Emily Renefel, Your Excellency and our dear brother, Wondimu Alemayu, Your Excellency and our dear brother, Ali Todaro, and my dear brother, George Okuth, representing the UN country team. Welcome. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored and privileged today to be with you on a very sad day for Africa, but on a day that we are celebrating a son of Africa, a global icon, and what I can confidently say, the smartest diplomat I have ever known, Mr. Kofi Annan. I am sure all of us have been following the news of the past few days. We lost one of ours on the 18th of August. And for the UN system here in Ethiopia, and indeed the Africa Union and the government of Ethiopia, it's only befitting that we have decided to hold this ceremony in this august place, because it is in this very building and at this very place and in this very country that Kofi Annan's first years in the UN system emerged. You all know that once he finished his first assignment in Geneva, way back in the 60s, he came to Ethiopia and worked for the Economic Commission for Africa. And you will hear a little more of that by a colleague who was his colleague at the time in a few minutes. I would like to thank the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, Dr. Vera Songwe, for bringing us all together today to honor and remember, but for me to celebrate this great leader. As he said himself, and I quote him, "We may have different religions, different languages, different colored skin, but we all belong to one human race." So we are here together today as one human race to bid farewell and to celebrate the life of Kofi Annan. With these few words, allow me, distinguished delegates, to call upon Her Excellency Ms. Vera Songwe, Executive Secretary and Under Secretary General of the ECA, to say a few remarks as we proceed with the proceedings of the day. Madam Songwe.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. I think in particular we have Ato Abraham and Ato Alemayo, who are the two colleagues that worked very closely with His Excellency, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan. Thank you for being here as well. It is with a heavy heart that I stand here today to honor the former Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Kofi Annan. For us at ECA, and for me in particular, it has been an interesting and very difficult process, because we were in Namibia on Friday and Saturday talking about him and planning to meet him on Monday, because one of the last things that he decided to take on as an important part of his work was road safety. And we had planned a big road safety event in Ghana where he was going to launch an Africa road safety piece of work. And I remember as we were preparing it with the teams, we were like, why does he want to do this in August? Everybody goes on vacation in August. But that's because he had planned to go to South Africa for the Nelson Mandela centenary. Then he was going to do Zimbabwe for the elections to make sure that there was peace. Then he was going to go to Ghana to make sure that we can protect our youth from car accidents. So this was the trajectory. So on Saturday, when we finished the SADC summit, unfortunately, the news came after the SADC summit was closed and everybody had disbanded at about 2 p.m. You know, you could just hear gasps from every part of the room as people were leaving. Oh my God, and then everybody looks at their phones and the news had come across. We called the president of Ghana and asked, what should we do? Should we go ahead or should we stop? And he said, no, we should continue with this piece of work, because this was what he would have wanted and this was something that was particularly important. So for us at ECA, and for the team that had been working on this, this was very close, because they had been working for the last 3 months very closely with His Excellency Kofi Annan. And I tell this because you would have seen a lot of tributes pouring in from all walks of life, from all kinds of people across the globe. I think, as you rightly said, he was African and we will continue to claim him, and the Ghanaians will claim him. And I have just been told that in Ghana, you belong to all of your extended family afterwards. And so I think we can all claim him, but he really was truly, if ever there was somebody who deserved the name of an international humanist, a peace fighter, there would never be any better than His Excellency Kofi Annan. He was indeed a true international statesperson. He was a noble defender of humanity, and as our UN Secretary General also described him, he was a champion for peace and a guiding force for good. Somebody actually said in one of the tributes that every decade the Lord gives 12 people to the world just to make sure that the world can continue to be peaceful, and that he clearly in this decade was one of those 12 people. And I think that this is a very, very powerful tribute for what he was and who he was. I think for those of us who saw him very recently, there was no sense that the end was impending. I think that everybody who has known him, we were together in Italy just a month ago, where he was talking about, again, Africa, peace, low-income countries, what new agenda for the low-income countries, how can you do that? And with President Ellen Sirleaf Johnson, who herself comes from a low-income country, discussing what is the new development paradigm, what do the SDGs do for low-income countries. So this was the person he was until the last day, always looking for a voice for those who didn't have a voice. He essentially was the voice of the voiceless. He was an inspiration for the youth. In the face of adversity, he was always there. I think we remember him in difficult times in the world, when things were difficult on our continent and without our continent in very many places. When he came on TV, he was the face of calm, he was the face of hope. And I think that that's how we would like to remember him. He was a brother, of course, a husband, a father, a grandfather, an uncle, and a friend. On his passing, his son wrote, "He was as present with each of us and the family as a whole, as he was with every crisis, every mission, and every intervention. No call, email, or text, sign of the times, went unanswered. No personal crisis unaddressed. No major family milestones or celebrations unattended, no matter what was happening in the world." And this, I think, when we were in Ghana on Monday, it's clearly a testament to somebody who was so busy that in Ghana, everything everybody said was about how he came home and that he made time for family. And you could just hear all those tributes about making sure that in the life that he led, which of course was a global life and which tore him apart, he still found the time to go back home, not just to Ghana, but to family, to friends. And I think we will hear that from our colleagues here as well, the distinct value that he placed in friendships and long-time friendships. And on Monday we were talking about that as well in Ghana, about how he continued to find people he had known, and I think you just said that. And I think this is the true value of, he was a human being. He was not just a Secretary General, but he was also a human being who valued friendships. While he spent a great part of his career working on the world stage, he always acknowledged his African identity. In his words, he said, "I feel profoundly African. My roots are deeply African, and the things I was taught as a child are very important to me. Our prayers and thoughts go out to his family. He was, is, and will always be a legacy in his own right. I would like to remember him today in light of a few of his many achievements. During his UN career, which began in 1962 and spanned various agencies and duty posts, including, as we have heard, the ECA here in Addis, and we will hear a little bit more about that. He also went to the WHO in Geneva and the Secretariat in New York. After working over 3 decades in the United Nations, he became the first Secretary General to emerge from within the ranks of the organization. He is credited with revitalizing the United Nations institutions during his tenure. His tenure was hardly without debate or criticism, but he also acknowledged his failures and his limitations. What he will always be remembered for are, of course, the 2001 Nobel Prize, which he was awarded together with the United Nations for their work on better organization and more peace in the world. On peace and security, as I said, he's always continued to promote responsibility to protect, which our current Secretary General is also continuing to protect. He advocated that beyond military intervention, a range of diplomatic actions could be utilized to protect civilian populations in such situations. It is no doubt that even in his passing, he was still doing the peace on the Rohingyas in Myanmar. This was one of the last pieces that he did, again trying to protect civilians. On development, he is credited with significant initiatives, including, of course, something that has been particularly important for the continent, the Millennium Development Goals, which elevated the development issues to the highest political level and challenged countries to translate their development vision into nationally owned plans. He also worked on the Global Compact and the Global Fund for HIV and Health. After serving in the United Nations, he continued to serve the world in his retirement. He worked first as he founded the Kofi Annan Foundation, and then he worked with the elders. Again, the elders were supposed to come and visit, and we have been working on that, so we hope that that will continue. He led the Commission of Eminent Africans to persuade rival factions in Kenya to reconcile after the disputed elections in 2008. Having seen the food crisis in 2008, he also launched the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa, which continues today. He served as chair of the Mo Ibrahim Prize for Achievement in African Leadership. And because he loved knowledge, he was also the Chancellor of the University of Ghana. And finally, his last discovery or finding was championing road safety. In Ethiopia today, for instance, we have about 170 fatalities for 10,000 vehicles, and I think that the government of Ethiopia is doing a lot of work on that front. And this was an important cause for him because we have about 100,000 kids around the world between the ages of 16 and 19 every day maimed from road accidents, which leads to health issues, inability to work, non-competitiveness. And for him, if we did not solve this problem, it was a huge part of the youth population that we were losing at a very early stage of their lives. So he decided that this was something that if we talked about the youth, we needed to address some of the very scourges that were affecting and afflicting the youth. And this is why he took on, together with the UN Special Representative on Road Safety, Jean Todt, the cause of road safety, working with the ECA. In closing, I want to share one of his quotes that inspires me and reminds me of the responsibility we have in this world. He always said, "To live is to choose, but to choose well. You must know who you are and what you stand for, where you want to go and why you want to go there." I think that if we all try to live these words as he has said, then we will be a better place for the continent in particular. Because we were in Ghana and because we were launching the road safety event on the day that he had picked, we as ECA have decided that we would remember his memory, and we hope together with the whole UN community on this day in Ethiopia with a road safety initiatives. So to remember his memory, every year on this day, we will have a road safety initiative and see whether we can reward countries on the continent that are doing better in improving the plight of road safety on the continent, to just ensure that we can remember what he wanted to do and that we remember him in good light, and particularly as a champion of the youth on the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Songwe, for reminding us of the journey of this global icon. And of course, for also reminding us of how much he was a family man. It reminded me as you spoke of a time I had the pleasure to be hosted by his wife in New York. And when he came home from work that day, he served us and helped his wife to serve us drinks and food. And that reminded me how much he was such a family man. Thank you very much. It now gives me great pleasure and honor to now call to the podium the State Minister of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, His Excellency Professor Afework Kasu, to say a few remarks. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's with a heavy heart that I, on behalf of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, join you, the United Nations family in Ethiopia, to commemorate and pay tribute to the life of the profound and beloved son of Africa, Mr. Kofi Annan, the former United Nations Secretary General. We Africans know how to celebrate the life of a great man while mourning his departure. I feel honored to commemorate the extraordinary life and achievement of our brother at the same place where he started his long and successful career at the UN Economic Commission for Africa, here in Africa's political and diplomatic capital, Addis Ababa. Mr. Kofi Annan was the face of the United Nations and represented multilateralism. He made us all Africans proud by his tireless service for the causes of peace, sustainable development, the rights of women, and above all, by being a staunch vanguard for the principles of the United Nations Charter. Most notably, Mr. Kofi Annan made crucial contributions to help developing countries navigate through and play a meaningful role in the increasingly globalizing world. He wrote, spoke, and established an organization for these causes that he believed in. Mr. Kofi Annan's service was not without challenges. In fact, he had served as the Secretary General of the United Nations at the dawn of a trying time for multilateralism. He dealt with the emergence of a new peace and security threats, armed conflicts that continue to date, and polarized debates on issues such as climate change that changed the dynamics of international relations. Through all this, Mr. Kofi Annan was exemplary in speaking truth to power and in putting forth his concerns regarding the rise of intolerant political cultures. At the time of his passing, Nobel Peace Prize laureate Kofi Annan was not done serving the world and was far from retirement. He continued to make huge contributions through his foundation for the betterment of the world. His great works and his remarkable legacy as a global champion for peace, development, and human rights will remain a true inspiration for all of us in Africa and the world at large. I wish to use this opportunity on behalf of my government and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia to express Ethiopia's deepest condolences to his family and friends. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, particularly for reminding us as well how Mr. Kofi Annan championed the rights of women. He once said, "Gender equality is more than a goal in itself. It is a precondition for meeting the challenge of reducing poverty, promoting sustainable development, and building good governance." So thank you for reminding us. It now gives me great honor and pleasure to call upon Mr. Ratebayo Todeta, the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Africa Union Commission, who will say his remarks on behalf of the Africa Union Commission. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madame la secrétaire exécutive de la CEA, Monsieur le secrétaire d'État aux Affaires étrangères, Mesdames, Messieurs, distingués invités, je voudrais tout d'abord, au nom du président de la Commission de l'Union africaine, Moussa Faki Mahamat, remercier l'ensemble de la famille des Nations Unies en Éthiopie, et particulièrement Madame Vera Songwe pour l'invitation qui nous est adressée en cette circonstance. En l'honneur de Feu Kofi Annan, ancien secrétaire général des Nations Unies, la Commission de l'Union africaine, sinon l'Afrique tout entière, retiendra de lui, en de simples mots, un très grand homme. En sa qualité de secrétaire général et par la suite dans le cadre de sa fondation, mais aussi du groupe des aînés. Kofi Annan a grandement contribué à la recherche de la paix et d'un développement durable en Afrique et dans le monde. Il a été l'un des pionniers de certaines politiques les plus novatrices des Nations Unies. Je citerai les objectifs du millénaire pour le développement ou la notion de la responsabilité de protéger. Infatigable artisan de paix, Annan n'a de cesse promu et défendu les valeurs de paix, de respect des droits de l'homme, de tolérance et de solidarité entre nations et peuples. Kofi Annan a activement soutenu le partenariat entre l'Union africaine et les Nations unies. Son indéfectible attachement à la paix dans le continent l'a conduit à promouvoir, en son temps avec le président Alpha Omar Konaré, l'opération hybride au Darfour, un modèle unique de coopération en matière de maintien de la paix entre l'Union africaine et les Nations unies, et bien d'autres initiatives clés à son actif. À ces instants où nous lui rendons un dernier hommage, et au moment où le continent poursuit résolument sa marche vers l'Afrique que nous voulons, puisse son héritage servir de source d'inspiration et de détermination pour nos leaders africains. Il restera à jamais une source de fierté pour l'Afrique, aux côtés de ceux et celles qui l'ont précédé. Je citerai Mandela et bien d'autres artisans de la paix. Nos sincères condoléances à toute la famille des Nations Unies et que son âme repose en paix. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Todeta, for reminding us of the work that was done by Mr. Kofi Annan to begin or to strengthen the relationship between the African Union Commission and the United Nations. Today, the United Nations and the African Union are enjoying a very healthy and strengthened collaboration, thanks to Mr. Kofi Annan. Allow me now to call upon Her Excellency Ambassador of the Republic of Ghana, Madame Ama Adoma Tum Amoa, to say a few remarks. Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Thank you. Your Excellency Professor Afawe Kasu, State Minister of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. Your Excellency Madame Vera Songwe, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is with sadness and a heavy heart that I join in this solemn occasion commemorating the life of His Excellency Mr. Kofi Annan, and to sign the book of condolence on behalf of the President of the Republic of Ghana, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, and the government and people of Ghana. The passing of Mr. Kofi Annan is a tragic loss, not only to the country of his birth, Ghana, but to Africa and the world at large. When he joined the United Nations, his intention was to work with the organization for only 2 years. However, he stayed on and eventually rose through the ranks to become the 7th Secretary General and the first from the sub-region, Sub-Saharan Africa, to occupy that exalted position. Busumburu Kofi Annan, a title bestowed on him by the Asantehene to reflect his character, always believed in peaceful dialogue and harmony for all mankind, irrespective of color, creed, or race. He was a consummate diplomat. His Excellency Mr. Annan was humble, selfless, and a highly respected Secretary General. He brought great renown to Ghana and Africa through his comportment and diplomacy in the global arena. Ghanaians are deeply saddened by the death of one of our great sons. On behalf of the entire nation, I extend our sincere and heartfelt condolences to his beloved Wilu, Nan Maria, his devoted children, Ama, Kojo, and Nina, and the entire family for this great loss. Madam Executive Secretary, permit me to express our deepest gratitude to you, your entire staff, and the United Nations family in Ethiopia, the African Union, and the government of Ethiopia for this occasion commemorating the life of this illustrious son of the soil, and also for expressing sympathies to his family as well as the government of Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Ama, especially for reminding us of the humility of Mr. Kofi Annan. He once said, gather these 5 virtues: dignity, confidence, courage, compassion, and faith, then you are a man, and I believe you are a woman. Thank you. Allow me now to call upon the representative of the donor community, the Counselor of the Swedish Embassy, Emily Renafet, who will speak on behalf of the donor community and, of course, of Sweden. Thank you very much. Emma, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me as a representative of the Embassy of Sweden in Addis Ababa to stand before you here today to celebrate the life and achievements of Mr. Kofi Annan. Kofi Annan personified what is best about the UN. He was a man with a strong moral conviction, careful judgment, and quiet determination. People who knew him said that he was a great listener, someone who made everyone in the room want to listen to. Kofi Annan was a man who truly valued dialogue and cooperation between nations and people. Kofi Annan will go down in history as a bold and independent leader of the United Nations. He continued the path that was set out by UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld by always standing up for the right of small countries and reminding us about the vulnerability of civilians in conflict situations. He also shared Hammarskjöld's definition of office, that he represented not only the UN member states, but the UN Charter itself. Kofi Annan was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2001 with the UN for their work for a better organized and more peaceful world. He will be remembered for many things, but I want to highlight 2 areas which are particularly close to our hearts as Swedes. First of all, Kofi Annan initiated a very important process of reform of the UN. Based on his own difficult experience, not least linked to the failures in Rwanda and Bosnia, he became a strong advocate for reforming the UN peacekeeping operations and focusing on peaceful resolution of conflicts. This work carries on his legacy today, and Sweden is a strong supporter. Secondly, Kofi Annan will be remembered for his efforts to implement the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. As a member of the UN Security Council 2017-2018, Sweden carries this torch forward. Kofi Annan knew and understood that without the inclusion of and respect for all, a sustainable peace can never be achieved. He also knew that gender equality makes societies more peaceful. And you know, we claim a part of Mr. Annan. Together with his Swedish wife, Nan, Kofi Annan was a dear and often seen visitor in Blekinge, in southern part of Sweden. He will be greatly missed by the people of Sweden and of the world. Kofi Annan personified global leadership and true dedication to peace and reconciliation, continuing his quest for peace today and in the future remains the best way to honor his memory. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emily, for further emphasizing what Kofi Annan stood for: peace, development, and equality to the whole world. Thank you very much. I'll now call upon two of our dear brothers and colleagues who, one of them knew Kofi Annan way back in the 60s as a colleague here in the United Nations, and the other who knew Kofi Annan personally. It is now my distinguished honor and pleasure to call upon Ato Wondimu Alemayu, the United Nations Staff Savings and Credit Association General Assembly Chairman, who will share his experiences of when they were young men in the United Nations here at the ECA. Ato Wondimu.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Please allow me to take you back to 50 years, first of all. It is with great sadness that all members of the United Nations family and organizations in Ethiopia heard the untimely passing of the respected son of Africa, Mr. Kofi Annan. We at ECA strongly feel the grief, since Mr. Annan has great attachment to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Mr. Annan joined the United Nations in 1962 while he was only 24 years old. His first worked as a budget officer for the United Nations World Health Organization. He then came to Ethiopia during the last decade of the 1960s and worked as Chief of Personnel of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. As the Chief of Personnel of ECA, Mr. Annan kept his office wide open and was always accepting the staff with a very welcoming gesture. He was very supportive for the staff career development programs. Those of us who had good fortune to work at ECA while Mr. Annan was the Chief of Personnel will remember the great achievements the Commission gained in staff development matters through training within the Commission and getting scholarships abroad. Mr. Annan had also a strong vision for staff mutual and welfare activities. He assisted in strengthening the already existing United Nations Employees Mutual Benefit Society established by ECA staff in 1963. His contribution did not end there. He played a very vital role in the establishment of the ECA Staff Savings Club in 1968, which is now known as the United Nations Staff Savings and Credit Association, UNESCO. Mr. Annan made vital contribution to the Savings Club till he was transferred to UN headquarters. Today's UNESCO could not have been able to celebrate its 50th anniversary this year had it not been to the vital contribution and assistance made by Mr. Annan. Those were great memories of the great African hero under whose guidance I worked as a junior staff of ECA at that time. Africa lost one of its dedicated sons, and ECA have lost one more pioneer soon after the loss of the former Executive Secretary, Professor Adebayo Adedeji. I feel that the loss of Mr. Annan extends far beyond the United Nations community. The loss will be for Africa. We will miss Annan terribly. May his soul rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ato Ondimu, for sharing that passionate reflection of your early years with Kofi Annan, and for also sharing with us how he was passionate for empowering his staff and the people he worked with. For he always used to say, every time he met young people, without a dream, you will never not get anywhere. He always encouraged us to dream and dream big and reach out to the skies. Thank you very much.
With all protocol observed, firstly, greetings to all of you gathered here today. The gathering this morning in this historic building, and you can see the dedication there from the former emperor, for the late Emperor Haile Selassie, was Africa Hall. This historic building, Africa Hall, to commemorate Mr. Kofi Annan, is very befitting, considering his love for this place, for meetings. He used to prefer Africa Hall to the new conference center for all meetings that he was having here. The admirable legacy Mr. Annan leaves behind for posterity has been amply talked about by the previous distinguished speakers. Permit me to take my turn to make very few remarks about Mr. Kofi Annan in my capacity as an ECA staff member who has been associated with all the many visits Mr. Annan undertook to ECA and Addis Ababa. My recollection of Mr. Annan is that of a man with warm personality and pleasant demeanor, always very calm, even when you make mistakes. He was described in one obituary as an international rock star of diplomacy, but we, the staff, will also remember the international statesman for his humility, as was said before, for being extremely personable, and for treating all people with respect. In such an hierarchical organization as ours and many others, it is indeed refreshing to encounter an enlightened leader with such qualities, who was so down to earth, kind and caring of all and of others, regardless of rank. Let me close my remarks by speaking about the lifelong affinity that Mr. Annan maintained for Ethiopia, and my former dear colleague, Wandimo Adebayo, with whom I started my career in ECA, spoke eloquently about. As a man who started his career with the ECA, he always showed a sentiment of attachment to this commission, to Addis Ababa and Ethiopia, of course, and the many friends he had in Ethiopia. On his visits to Addis Ababa, while UN Secretary General, he would greet, often by their first name, and embrace the older Ethiopian and other colleagues he served with in his early UN years, as Wandimo just said. On one occasion, the UN Security and Services complained bitterly with me and other colleagues that were organizing his last visit here, that with all the staff surging forward to hug Mr. Annan, it was impossible to protect him. Not that he needed protection, as he was universally loved. May you, dear Kofi Annan, rest in peace in your new home. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Todaro, for sharing those passionate memories of your journey and life with Kofi Annan. Let me now call upon my dear brother and colleague, the Director of the International Labour Organization, Country Office for Ethiopia, Djibouti, Somalia, Sudan, and South Sudan, Mr. George Okuthu, who will be speaking on behalf of the UN country team. George, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Letty. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, colleagues in the UN, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the UN country team in Ethiopia, I'm deeply honored to stand before you this morning to celebrate the life of one of the African's greatest sons, an international leader who has a remarkable contribution for a more peaceful, prosperous, and just world. The passing on of Mr. Kofi Annan is not only a loss to Ghana and the United Nations, but for the entire world. I know that a lot has already been said about him by the speakers before me and by those whose lives have been touched and inspired by his work. But for us in the UN country team in Ethiopia, we deeply acknowledge his vision, commitment, and determination to bring us together as one UN family. During his many visits to Addis Ababa, and despite the tight schedules, Mr. Annan would always find time to engage with the country team and the entire staff community in town hall meetings. His words of wisdom, forward-looking, and encouragement has always been a great source of inspiration for all of us. And this reminds me of a Ghanaian proverb which says, an army of sheep led by a lion can defeat an army of lions led by a sheep. Mr. Kofi Annan was a lion of the United Nations. He fought with us a number of battles, but he did it with humility, with firmness, and persuasion. I think the Nobel Peace Prize that he won in 2001 was a recognition of his contribution as a great leader, an excellent diplomat, and a respected peace mediator. Ms. Annan reformed the UN peacekeeping operations, the human rights protection, and counterterrorism efforts. Is also credited for bringing and initiating the much talk about delivering S1 in the UN. We in Ethiopia decided to become a self-starter for the Delivering S1 initiative. And I can confirm that with that effort, all of us, the 29 agencies that are based in Addis Ababa, are now providing consolidated, coherent support to the government and the people of Ethiopia. Mr. Kofi Annan has also massively influenced all of us to have a clear vision and commitment to eradicating poverty, hunger, universal education, better health, environmental sustainability, freedom, justice, and equality for all. And I just want to quote him in one of his interviews when he talked about social justice. And he said, "Social justice to me is an attempt by all of us to be sensitive to the needs of others, to show solidarity and sympathy," unquote. The MDGs that Vera has already talked about is a milestone in the way the global community would approach development challenges. And it was very instrumental in ensuring that the global leaders adopt this milestone. I have no doubt that it was because of the MDGs that we have scored a number of gains in different parts of the world. And again, is the inspiration for the new SDG agenda for 2030. As an African, I'm extremely proud of him for taking this prestigious job as Secretary General of the United Nations and making it with a remarkable success. His commitment to the continent did not stop. In 2006, it continued to be showcased up to the day and up to the last days of his life. As a member of the UN family, we are also very proud that he's the only US Secretary General that took up the position arising from the rank of the organization. That should be a very big encouragement to all of us. Finally, Kofi Annan has lived full life demonstrating his utmost dedication to world peace, justice, equality, and unity. Again, I'd like to drop some wisdom from our African proverbs, which says, when an elder dies, a library is bound to the ground. It is now up to us as leaders in the UN, in government, civil society, and others to make sure that the wisdom and the lessons from Mr. Kofi Annan are used to continue on the battle to make the world safe and prosperous home for all of us. Thank you, and may his soul rest in peace.
I want to remind us that as we bid farewell to Kofi Annan, may his legacy live long May we all continue to strive for peace, unity, and respect for the human race, because that's what he has taught us. And I'll now call upon all of us to stand, for those that are sitting, for a minute of silence. Thank you very much. May his soul rest in eternal peace. You can take the honor and request protocol to assist us as we call all the speakers to open and sign the Book of Condolences.